Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy. So this is an episode about a book, and I'm talking today with Sarah Noll Wilson. She's an executive coach, leadership development consultant who's been freeing elephants for 15 years, and you'll learn more about that later. Sarah works with leaders to develop more powerful partnerships and helps teams spot patterns that are keeping them from higher performance. So she's a keynote speaker. She leads workshops and team retreats for leaders and HR professionals. She's worked in management and talent development leader for an insurance company, giving her first-hand insights into the challenges of corporate leadership. She holds several coaching certifications and has a master's in leadership development from Drake University. She's also the author of Don't Feed the Elephants, which is what we're talking about today and what connected us in the first place. And if you're a humanagist, a humanity supporter, you'll find it's very much aligned with the work in What Great Teams Do Great. It just comes at it from a different angle. And I love my conversation here with Sarah. Enjoy. Well, welcome, Sarah. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we first met at a conference where you were presenting this rather nice kind of keynote speech based on your book, which you've got behind you there, nicely situated. It's always a good thing to do to sit a good book
Yeah,
on.
you like that?
Yeah, Don't Feed the Elephants. And as I was listening to it, I kept thinking, wow, this is everything that we've talked about at Humanergy, just written in a different format, for a different perspective, and how wonderful it was to hear people talking about the same kind of thinking, the same kind of work with individuals, and adding to it a flair about neurodivergence and things like that. And so we had to talk, and we have done since. And I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk about your book. So tell us give us the key points of Don't Feed the Elephants and why anybody should buy it.
Why anyone should buy it. I say that it's my love letter to fellow avoiders of conflict. The book was born out of me realizing that highest performing teams are ones that can have conversations. They can, call the elephant out in the room. And I realized that I had never experienced that, not only in a team, but also in relationships. And thus 15 years ago started my journey for how do I move from somebody who was raised to be very conflict avoidant into one who could have those more courageous conversations. So the idea of don't feed the elephants is how do we have the conversations we're avoiding, or even recognize when maybe it's okay that we don't have the conversation, but we do so intentionally and from a place of choice and power. So why people should buy it. I think you witness this in your work, and we certainly see it not just in our work, but also as I pay attention to the people around me. There's a lot of suffering because we don't know how to have the conversations with each other that are meaningful, that might be hard, that might be emotionally charged. And I just really believe that life gets better when we're able to talk about the things that we don't.
So that was the big parallel. We talk about having caring, honest, and direct conversations. And the problem is we're all good at two of those things.
Yeah.
And so especially in the Midwest here, Midwest nice is being caring and honest, but not always direct.
Yeah.
And what you were talking about is, hey, we need to be willing to, we need to train ourselves to have those and stop that because of everything that comes when we don't have that conversation, the ripple effects of that. It kind of
Well, and
gets
sometimes,
emotional, psychological.
yeah, and a lot of times I think people struggle with even being honest. I think caring can feel easy or niceness, but that's not always the kindest thing. And one of the things we hear, even in using the language like direct, is that can feel really assertive for some people. So for us, we've reframed it as how do we get clear? How do we be more explicit with each other so that we can have those higher quality conversations?
Because people who are honest and direct are seen as being blunt and scary. And so that's why we put the three together. You've got to have all three. And that caring is not about being nice. That caring is about thinking about the best way to have this conversation with this individual.
Yeah.
So that was what triggered me. Is that there's so many parallels. That's so
Oh,
wonderful.
yeah.
And this idea of the elephant in the room,
Mhm.
and the idea that we should stop feeding it. And you even characterize some of the more traditional elephants that people
Mhm.
see.
And there's, some audience members have created more that have been added to the menagerie. uh,
So
it
what's
wa-
some of the most common ones?
yeah, so well, actually, I want to pull open the section in the book where people talk about it in the workbook, but I'll be able to speak to them.
Do a quick plug there,
Oh
because
yeah,
there
you
is a
want
second.
the quick
Yeah,
plug? The
yeah.
quick plug is we're launching the workbook. True Story was supposed to launch today. There were some technical glitches on the site we're using, so next week. But no, but one of the things that I realized is that people were being equipped with how to have conversations, whether that was through crucial conversations, difficult conversations, radical candor, but they still weren't having the conversations. And so I became really interested in getting curious about the avoidance and how do we, if we don't catch that we're avoiding, if we can't name it, then we can't then choose the great skills that we're learning in all these workshops. And so the most common elephant types, I mean, the main archetype, the main genus species is the avoidant, where we're avoiding either acknowledging with ourselves or with someone else, having the conversation. Other quintessential ones are what we call the blame-a-fint, where we spend more time blaming other people or blaming somebody without having the conversation with them or considering the role we've played. My personal favorite is the imagivant, where we spend a lot of time imagining a story instead of checking it out. The deflective-fint, the nudge-a-fint. But the ones that people have come up with, actually, I think are quite brilliant. Somebody said that he feeds an optimifant. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, I think I use my optimism as a deflection because I just hope it'll work out well, but I don't actually do anything to make it work out well, which I thought was so beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. And you get into what these all are characterized like, and how to both recognize it and then what to do with it, and really how to
Yeah.
address, once you've labeled it, what you should be doing with that. And not only that, you have a bit of fun with some wonderful cartoon versions of, for example, I'm showing up the Blamer font here,
Yeah. I
but
mean, my favorite illustration in the book, just so you know, is the deflectifant, where it's the elephant holding up the little elephant puppet and he's pointing at it like, look at this, like, let's be distracted about this. And I don't, David, I don't know if you know this, but my husband did all the illustrations.
oh, that makes it even more
Yeah.
fun, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So then you've got the Imagifant, for example. So I'm
Mhm.
imagining all these possibilities that could happen.
Mhm.
And and quite often in my experience, it's the worst possible case
Yeah. Yeah.
that I'm driving. How do we deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, first, just understand that that's human nature. Our brains are, when our brains are missing information, we're more likely to come from a place of protection or a place of distrust. Or I lovingly say, if we don't have information, then we start to doubt, and doubt doesn't party alone. It brings distrust with it. And for all the elephants or any time that we catch ourselves avoiding, one of the strategies, and I say one of because, as you know, and your audience knows, there isn't a one size fits all approach to a conversation and a relationship, but to just start to get really curious with yourself. What do I know to be true? What do I not know to be true? Especially with the imagifant, an example that I often hear from people. Maybe somebody sends an email and it's short. It's not sharp, but it's short. So what we know to be true is he didn't say thank you or ask how our day was. And what do we need to get curious about, or what do we need to clarify with them? For some people, just asking that question's enough to say, oh, I bet David was just moving too fast and that's why he sent it. And so I can free the elephant without even having a conversation with you. For other people, they may follow up and say, hey, I just want to check in. Is everything okay? I wasn't sure how to read the tone of your email. And then they realize that the person was like, I know you were working under a deadline and I wanted to get the information to you so you can move forward. But our brain is so good at filling in stories. And unless we're intentional about it, often the stories will come from a place of protection.
I think the
Yeah.
Native Americans used to call it, they had a tool called the Rule of Six, which was, you know, not that the Native Americans got cut up in traffic very often, but if you got
Sure.
cut off in traffic, that you immediately thought jerk. But
Mm,
then this rule of six would say come up with five other equally
mm,
valid but different reasons why that might have happened. And by the time you got to the sixth one, it would unhook you from that initial emotional
yeah,
reaction.
yeah. And it's not negating and it's not dismissing ourselves. It is I really appreciate the language of, is it possible that that message was intended to be sharp? It's possible, but it's not necessarily a guarantee until we validate that. And I will say, and again, I'm sure you experience this, how many times people will have a conversation and they go in expecting it to be terrible. And I know they're just going to be awful receiving. And then they come back and go, oh, it wasn't so bad. And actually, I realize that we're on the same page with like 80% of it. And we just have to figure out the last 20 because our brains are so creative.
Well, that's another thing we found. We call it the slippery slope because if we don't
Yeah.
have the conversation now, it's not going to get any better.
Yeah.
And so we just end up in this slippery slope where it declines into this thing that I now hate Sarah
Hmm.
because she wrote me a short email and I haven't dealt with it.
Right. Right. And those little erosions can happen over time. And I think of it as almost like an iceberg. We just start to move away from each other. And then sometimes it's too late for us to reconnect and repair. But these little moments when we can repair or clarify or get curious or check in with intent and or share impact or whatever the moment needs is so powerful because regrettable events are going to happen. Period. We're fallible humans. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to have different values. And so how we are able to show up in those moments is what matters. Yeah.
So I recognize my elephant.
Yeah.
I know it's that. So if you're saying at that point, I've got my elephant, I know
Yeah.
where it's at. I've got my imagiphant or my blamephant there. I
Hmm.
got it. I recognize how that's come about and what the dangers are around
Mm.
that.
Hmm.
Uh, are there common paths to getting once you've recognized the elephant in the room
Yeah.
to getting
Yeah.
out of it?
Yeah, I mean the approach the tool we created, we call it the curiosity first approach, and it's a pretty simple reflection tool. And the reason for curiosity, there's a number of reasons. One, when we're in the heat of the moment, we're really frustrated, maybe our brain is flooded. It's very hard for us to be curious about why we're frustrated. I realize so often people would be frustrated about something or about someone, and they couldn't articulate why. They couldn't consider the role that they played, and they couldn't consider the perspective of the other person. And again, you can hear how we might not use that in all situations, but the simplest model or practice somebody might try is to be curious with yourself. What am I feeling? What values are being stepped on? What needs do I have? What do I know? And then to get curious about the other person. And then getting curious about the other person isn't filling in their story. It's just reminding ourselves that they have a story. And then I lovingly say that when our curiosity hits the wall, then we probably need to have a conversation. And so then how do we get curious with them? And obviously there are times where we may need to be much more direct, much more clear, really set a boundary, share feedback that is, hey, this was inappropriate and this is a non-negotiable and you can't say this to me or whatever the case might be. But largely, most people appreciate having the opportunity to um, be able to share their perspective. And so the getting curious with is just how do we more intentionally prepare for the conversation? A lot of people get so focused on what are the right words. Um, again, there's no such thing as right words. It's just what's right for this moment, this relationship. With the right words with you are going to look very different than the right words with my husband versus the right words with my colleague, Dr. Teresa Peterson. But if we know we're going into a conversation, how do we get really clear about what's my intention? What can I do to set this conversation up for success? I think a question everyone should ask themselves before stepping into a potentially emotionally charged conversation is what traps might I fall into and how do I avoid those? Right? Oh, this is somebody that just makes me, like go crazy, or I want to just be right, or whatever the case might be. Um, and then when we think about a conversation, and I think I shared this at the session, the first 3 minutes are one of the most important in a conversation. So how do we, as simply as possible, say, Hey, I want to follow up on this. I want to get your perspective on it, and I want to share my perspective on it. Would you be open to having that conversation? So, the other reason curiosity is so valuable is because it does a couple of things. When we are able to activate our brain and our prefrontal cortex, this is like our highest functioning part of our brain, is where it was where curiosity lives. When we're able to activate that, that starts to emotionally regulate us. And we know that one of the quickest ways to emotionally settle someone else or to help them increase trust with us is for them to be truly heard. And so curiosity is just such a gift.
Which is interesting. A couple of episodes ago, I talked with Bill from Braver Angels, an
Mm,
organization that is working within companies to help them help bridge the political divide that we have and have
mm,
conversations.
mm,
And the big theme of his work was curiosity.
hmm.
And rather than try and change somebody else's perspective, be curious about it. And
Yeah.
so here in October 24, it's an ideal time to be really doubling down on your curiosity. But you're saying in every instance, everywhere.
Well, and curiosity doesn't I can seek to understand you and still not agree with you. I think sometimes we confuse that I can understand your perspective and still disagree with it, but I can take the time to understand it. Actually just had a conversation today with two really lovely facilitators, Lauren Yi and Gabor, and they talk about how every moment of communication really is a moment of seeking connection with someone, and I love that idea and that visual. And so, how do we approach communication through a lens of connection? But I understand the politics gets challenging, especially when somebody's politics directly impacts your livelihood. And
In
but
that
again, I think we can seek to understand it, but we don't necessarily have to agree.
place of wanting to make a connection tends to drive people to, well, I better tell them about how I can connect with that, which is then moving away from that sense of I want to remain curious so that I fully understand where you're coming from before I insert myself into that
Mhm,
conversation.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's just I think all people just wanna be heard. And to have that, yeah, just that consideration of here's where I'm coming from. Um, and I think that that's part of the challenge now is that we're so quick to shut down that curiosity because we're afraid of what message it might send. We're afraid of whatever the case might be. And I can be genuinely curious with you. I can understand and go, yeah, that makes sense why you feel this way. And it also makes sense why I feel this way. And both things are true. Like there's not a right or wrong. I do believe that when we enter into relationships through this lens of right, like win or lose, we've already lost,
Yeah, yeah.
because we're complicated and we have different needs and different opinions. And yeah, and something really fantastic can happen when we're able to work across those differences.
Yeah, earlier this year, we came out of an event, and my wife just looked over and said, I really didn't like them until I got to know them. And I
Mm,
thought, what a profound statement.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just love that, the shortness of that. It's like, yeah, that could
Yeah,
be a title of something that
yeah.
goes broader for us all, couldn't it?
It does. Well, that's part of why we invite people to get curious about the other person. What might they need in this moment? What might their perspective be? What values do we know that's true about them? What information do I have that they don't have? Because part of it is, especially if we're really frustrated or if we're frustrated for a long period of time, is it can be really easy to dehumanize somebody. And once you realize, like, most people share a lot of similarities, we just may not communicate it in the same way, or we might hold different priorities in those similarities.
And so you're really encouraging not just the awareness of your elephant, but the curiosity both internally. Let's pay attention to what it is that's triggering me or whatever else that's in there, and then the preparation for having the interaction with the other people to make
Yeah.
sure I'm in the best frame of mind, that I'm being clear. I'm setting up, like you said, the first 3 minutes of that to be clear about what we need to get to, so that then we can work through it and come out of there saying, "Oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was
Yeah,
going to be."
yeah. Yeah, and even if it's not resolved, I think that's a trap that people fall into, or maybe I don't know, Hollywood has painted this picture that, well, we just need to have this, knockout, drag out fight, or we'll have one conversation. And I mean, let's be real. If a problem's been persisting for years, we're not going to solve it in a one conversation. But can we create the conditions for both people to speak their truth, which aligns with your point of honesty? Can we listen and ask questions as much as we are talking? Can we emotionally regulate? Can we be open to having our minds change? And to me, those are the hallmarks of a high quality conversation. And the truth of the matter is, none of us are born knowing how to do this. We have to learn it, and we're all shaped by our culture and our family and our friends and all of that fun stuff.
And what I liked about it is you're giving a language to something that is broad. I work with a lot of
Mm,
people who say I'm conflict averse,
mm,
and I've always pushed back and said, no, you're conflict delayant,
sure.
because it's not going to go away. It's just
No,
going to get
yeah,
worse later on. But
yeah,
what your book does is really say, okay, well, what is it that gives me a label to hang that conflict avoidance on, and then some approaches to overcome it.
yeah. One of my favorite colleagues is this amazing attorney down in Texas. Her name's T. Maxine Woods McMillan. And she would say, you don't avoid conflict, you just reposition or displace it. It's always there. It's going to go somewhere. Now, I did have a guy once push me on that and say, yeah, but sometimes I just like choke it back with my wife. And I'm like, but it's still not still there. Do you see your anger right now in talking about that? It's literally present in this room. And I think that what I want for people, if I were to sum up one of the things that I am really passionate about is, how do we shift this narrative of, I'm a conflict avoidant. It makes me uncomfortable. I'm not going to have the conversation until I can feel confident. This is something we hear from so many people. I just want to feel confident. And the reality is you might not. You might not always feel confident. You might not always feel comfortable. But if you can be intentional about it, because I think if our goal is to never experience discomfort, then we're chasing something that's not going to exist. Because if that relationship matters, if speaking up matters, if advocating for something matters, the reason we're avoiding it is because it feels risky to us, right? And so how do we, that's been my personal journey. So I'll just speak from that. And a lot of the people we work with is, it might not be easy. And maybe that's not the goal. But how can we be present with each other? How do we be honest with each other? How do we be curious, compassionate, candid, all of those things with each other, so that hopefully we can move forward?
So a last question,
Yeah.
and this is one that potentially we could always edit out later if I get it completely wrong. Is there a gender difference? Do you see that this is uh, a bigger issue on the
Yeah.
feminine side of the divide?
Um, so let's speak to what research would back up. We know that women are perceived differently when they're more direct. There is a consequence to me being direct in a way that you wouldn't experience. And
Oh, there
so
isn't. Sorry.
um, and so women in particular have to balance warmth with assertiveness in a way that most men don't. But even men do have to. I mean, you will be more effective. And I'm hearkening to the work of Dr. Allison Forgale in her newest book, Likeable Badass, where she talks about this. I think that one of the challenges that I definitely see, again, from a feminine or a female perspective, that isn't a flaw within women, but I would say a flaw within our culture, is that we are expected to nurture other people. We are expected to sacrifice ourselves for other people. And um, and that plays out not only in the way I talk to myself about, am I worthy to speak up? Am I worthy to ask for what I really need? But also, will the other person receive it, or will they view me as, she's too passionate, she's too aggressive, she's too bossy, she's too whatever? That there is a real bias that exists out there. No, like, the flip side is, when we talk about conversations of conflict, that's just one type of emotionally charged conversation. Let's talk about vulnerable conversations where the emotionally charged isn't anger or frustration, but maybe it's tenderness. And that bias very much affects men in a way that it doesn't affect women.
I just wonder whether you're seeing that, and you know, a lot of my clients in particular, that there is a little imbalance there in terms of, and I agree with you. I think it's cultural.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
created this, and I think one of the things your book does is provide some tools and some language to help lift one side and
Hmm.
lower the other side into that place
Yeah.
of curiosity
Well,
to get the balance that we want.
and I think that the challenge is again, the data is very conclusive. The gender bias is very real on both sides. And that's not just men towards women, that's women towards women, and that's men towards men and women towards men. So let's just like name that what it is. And I think the problem is for so long, the solutions have been we need to help women do more stuff instead of recognizing, but how we show up when a woman is assertive also needs to be addressed. It's kind of the old women negotiate as much as men, they're just not as effective because they're viewed as they should be grateful. They shouldn't want to negotiate, whereas it's received differently. And so I think that's part of the shift too, is um, yeah, just recognizing that it isn't a flaw of a woman. It's the conditions in which, we've grown up, and we haven't even touched on how the risk of speaking up is different. And it's different if you're not in a position of power and authority. It's different if you don't have the formal authority. It's different if you don't have the informal. So like, I mean, we're just talking generically about women, but now let's add on different identities. If I'm a Black woman, that's a whole different risk level for me to speak up, because now I'm fighting different intersectionality biases that are just different. So I think this is one of the, and I actually really appreciate you asking this, because this is an important conversation, because a lot of the work that has been put out there around conversations, difficult conversations, were written from a male perspective. And that's just it. Great that that works for you, but that might not work for me. Just like me as a white woman, I have people who go, I love this for you. I don't know that I can do some of this because I think it would be too risky.
Yeah, I think that's why I appreciated both your presentation and your book, is that it should be, absolutely, it's a resource for people who are lacking that confidence to, or having that conflict avoidance. And at the same time, it's a great resource for the rest of folks to be looking and saying, what part am I playing in this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the books I recommend to folks all the time is How Women Rise.
Mm,
And it, I read that. I think it was reading it in bed one night, and I was saying, "Wow, can you believe all of this stuff?" And my wife saying, "Well, yeah."
yeah.
Are you an
Like,
idiot?
we're so glad that you're understanding. And like,
So,
yeah, yeah, we're
yeah,
very.
thank you for coming along at last, kind of thing. But I think it's that even the title, How Women Rise, it's a great book for women
Yeah.
because they go through it and they say, "Yep, that's me, that's me,
Yep.
that's me."
Yeah.
And it's a great book for men to go through and say, "Oh,
Mm, mm-hmm.
I got
Mm-hmm.
some work to do." And
Mm-hmm.
the same thing applies, I think, on either side in your book, that we have to recognize when people are sitting with an elephant,
Yeah.
and that we may be helping create that elephant
Yeah.
as much
Or
as those
or
people.
at the very least, we may be not making it safe for that elephant to be freed. I mean, that's the one thing. And this makes me think of, and so for people who are listening, I always love recommending other authors. So Elaine Lynn Herring wrote this amazing book called Unlearning Silence. And I love that. And when I say I find that language of silencing and unsilencing very provocative, because we have to be willing to not ask ourselves, do I silence people or don't I? We have to ask ourselves, in what ways do I silence people? In what ways do I give them voice or not? And that's exactly what you're speaking to. It's just the role I might be playing is I don't actually make it safe for people, or I make it safe for some people, but not all people. And that takes an incredible amount of courage, but it's necessary to do that interrogation.
You said that, and now I have to silence you by bringing this to an end. So that makes me feel bad. How does that work? So,
I
so now I'm feeling really bad. I'm going to spend the
know.
weekend
I mean, I
Very
don't know that
good.
you're silencing me. I think we're just wrapping up the show because it's clear, David, you and I could talk a lot. So it's, for the betterment of everyone.
So other than Don't Feed the Elephants, which is available, I'm assuming, at all good bookstores
Yep.
and at Amazon,
Hmm.
and where else can people find out more about you?
Yeah, they can go to our website. It's my name, Sarah Noll Wilson. I was going to give my email, sarahnollwilson.com. And while I always joke, while the company name is me, there's a team of 10 that does amazing work. And we'll be evolving that next year. So super excited about that. But yep, sarahnollwilson.com. It's work we're terribly passionate about and love to talk to people just to help them have better conversations so they can have better connections and better relationships.
And I also love the fact that you and I talked a little bit earlier and about names and the fact that you're keeping the name because it's good to have a name, a company named after a woman.
Yeah, I think so.
And
I think that's where we're going to land, some variation, but who knows? I mean, but probably.
you've got the Don't Feed the Elephants workbook coming out anytime now.
Yeah. By the time this airs, it will be. Yeah. I
And I
hope.
believe if people go to sarahnollwilson.com, they can also find your podcast,
Mhm.
Conversations on Conversations.
Yeah. And we also have a weekly newsletter where we talk about all stuff leading people and leading self. So we'd love to connect with you.
Sarah, thanks very much for joining us. I'm not silencing you. We're just bringing this to an end for now. We'll continue good conversation. I look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, David.
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanergy, go to humanergy.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.